For the ones who get it done, the most important part is the one you need now. And the best partner is the one who can deliver. That's why millions of maintenance and repair pros trust Grainger, because we have professional-grade supplies for every industry, even hard-to-find products. And we have same-day pickup and next-day delivery on most orders. But most importantly, we have an unwavering commitment to help keep you up and running. Call, click Grainger.com, or just stop by. Grainger, for the ones who get it done.
He's a former law enforcement officer, became an attorney. He went to law school, while he was policing in the state of Georgia. He's a nationally renowned expert at defending police, especially when it comes to use of force cases. He's here to talk about some of the things that the media won't tell you. Welcome to the Law Enforcement Talk Radio Show. In the Law Enforcement Talk Radio Show, we are joined by special guests talking about their experiences, the realities of investigating crimes, plus those who have experienced horrendous trauma. Police, first responders, military, and victims of crime share their stories. Hi, I'm John J. Wiley. In addition to being a broadcaster, I'm also a retired police sergeant. Be sure to check out our website, letradio.com, and also like us on Facebook. Search for the Law Enforcement Talk Radio Show. Do you want to be a guest on Law Enforcement Talk Radio Show and podcast? It's really quite simple. And before you get into this notion that I'm not a cop, I wasn't a cop, I don't have something to contribute. Well, the show is about investigating crime. That's one aspect of it from the real life perspective of those who did it. And then it's also about trauma, how trauma impacted them, often crime-based, but not always. Our guests quite often are law enforcement officers, other first responders, military, victims of crime, their spouses, or survivors, talking about how trauma impacted them, what happened, how it affected their lives, and how they rebuilt their lives after. If you want to be a guest, just contact me. It's really simple. Send an email to jay@letradio.com. That's jay@letradio.com. Or go to letradio.com and the Contact Us page, and you can get me right there as well. Contact us from Georgia. We have Lance LoRusso. He's a former law enforcement officer, attorney at law. His website is bluelinelawyer.com. That's bluelinelawyer.com. He's written many books. He is licensed to practice, I think, in 3 states, Georgia, Tennessee, and Arkansas. He helps nationwide with lawyers defending police, in particular when it comes to use of force cases. Lance, thanks for being on the show. It's been a while, and it's a pleasure to talk to you like always.
Thank you so much for having me. It's exciting.
It's been a while. It's been too long. We need to do this a little bit more often. And today we're going to talk a little bit about, because this is in Lance's wheelhouse, we're going to talk about, and we're not going to go in specific cases because of confidential reasons and a lot of different reasons why, but we're going to talk about a lot of things that involve police use of force that go to trial that shouldn't, that a lot of people don't know about, and they react off emotion. They react off of, and they totally ignore this little thing called facts. Before we do that, Lance, how many books have you written now, and what are the titles of those?
I think I've written about 12, maybe 13, and the books that are out divided into fiction and nonfiction. So let's talk about the nonfiction first, because the profits from those books go to law enforcement and public safety charities. The first book I wrote was When Cops Kill: The Aftermath of a Critical Incident, and that book is basically to guide law enforcement officers through a critical incident. I've represented about 180 officers in shootings. And, you remember when you and I are contemporaries in law enforcement, we started out, people said, well, okay, if you get into a shooting, this will happen, and it won't be fun. Well, we wanted to let people know what actually happens. What's it like to be under investigation? What's it like to be interviewed by the homicide unit that, you know those folks because you get coffee with them.
Right.
So it's a very interesting situation. So that's the next book I wrote was Blue News. Blue News is about the intersection of media and law enforcement. Nothing timely there, but obviously letting people timely, know. Right? No, nothing timely. But, I recognize that law enforcement officials, public safety officials, were struggling. A lot of times they were thrust into a media spotlight. They didn't know what to expect. Very few agencies have a PIO, and even fewer have more than one PIO. So when a situation came to your door and it all came crashing down and you had tons of media personnel at your front door, it didn't take much to overwhelm that system. So that's what Blue News is about. I also wrote a book called Firefighters in the Hot Seat, about firefighters and internal affairs investigations. Realized there was really nothing out there for firefighters dealing with OPS investigations.
Right.
And I ask this question all the time. Yeah, you'll love this. I ask questions all the time. Say, how many people love the folks you work with? And everybody raises their hand. Say, how many of y'all want to live with them? And everybody puts their hand down. Well, firefighters, they live with people every day. Sometimes they're strangers. They get to know them. But between personalities and just the general discipline and rules and regulations, I thought that something was lacking. So we wanted to give firefighters an opportunity to have some guidance in those investigations. So one of the things that with those three books, being in public safety is scary enough. Facing down an armed subject, running into a burning building to save a stranger is scary enough. My firm has been committed, and these books are an effort to make sure that the most scary part of your job is not report to the chief's office or I did my job and now I'm being second guessed.
Right. And we'll get into, because there's a movement from people who really don't understand about end qualified immunity and life will be great. And we'll talk about that. The other one, I think the last time we talked, the big thing was defund the police. And what a disaster that has been for the United States.
Yeah, defund the police is the fastest conceived, implemented, and failed social policy in United States history. So kudos to the people who were doing it. You found a way to fail faster than anybody else. And what's interesting is the people who look out for the public, the law enforcement officers, were saying it was going to fail, because if you defund the police, it has no effect on the people who work behind magnetometers and live behind gates and live in high rises with security. It was going to affect the poor people in communities, the single mom who has to watch her kids on the bus stop to make sure the kids don't get recruited by gangs or sold drugs before they go to their sixth grade classroom. So it failed, and people are starting to realize it wasn't going to work. And, it's a strange concept, but most criminals don't commit crime if the police are standing there.
No, they don't. Isn't it ironic how that happens? And here's the other thing a lot of people don't get, and I've had this discussion many times. It's not the first-time offender that is usually the problem. It is someone that has a multiple arrests, multiple convictions, and they're career criminals. They're the ones that are ruining your life.
Yeah, and it's interesting. We talk about I talk about people distinguishing themselves. Some people distinguish themselves and win Pulitzer Prizes and Nobel Prizes, and other people distinguish themselves by being multiple convicted felons who have no regard for anyone else and disregard personal properties and the sanctity of life. So that's one of the other reasons I delved into the fiction part. So the first novel that I wrote, Hunting of Men, is about law enforcement in a very raw and real sense. It has an element of human trafficking, which is probably one of the hardest crimes that we're dealing with now publicly, fortunately. But I wanted to write a book about how cops really investigate crimes and what cops are like. As I tell people, if you want to read the book about the alcoholic homicide detective with 7 ex-wives who beats everybody up and hates the chief, go read somebody else's book.
That's right.
If you want to know what it's like to actually be a cop, if you want to know what it's like to carry that burden of what you see every day, to work with people who are extroverts and introverts and people who are just funny, people who go home and read all night until they fall asleep and start it up again in the morning. That's why I wrote Hunting of Men.
Here's the thing. We'll get back to the conversation in your books in a moment. We're talking about Lance LoRusso. He's a former police officer, and he went to school, became a lawyer. His website is bluelinelawyer.com, and he works closely with other law firms defending police across the United States. And he's licensed to practice, I believe, in Georgia, Tennessee, and Arkansas. His website is bluelinelawyer.com. When we return, we're going to talk about some things that are not reported in the media that a lot of people get wrong. We're going to talk about qualified immunity. We're going to talk about the old philosophy that I had. I'd rather be tried by 12 than carried by 6, and that still applies today. And unfortunately, lots of folks are being tried by 12, and they shouldn't be. Of all the radio stations in the United States, there are no other shows like the Law Enforcement Talk Radio Show. And on Facebook, there's only one official page. Do a search on Facebook for the Law Enforcement Talk Radio Show, and be sure to like the Law Enforcement Talk Radio Show Facebook page. This is the Law Enforcement Talk Radio Show. Don't go anywhere. We'll be right back.
Remember when free meant free? No charge, no credit card information needed. Well, a place like that still exists on the internet. The Law Enforcement Talk Radio Show website, letradio.com. Where everything is free, including the podcast, episodes are available after airing on radio. The website is letradio.com. That's letradio.com. Where free means free.
If you work in quality control at a candy factory, you know strict safety regulations come with the job. It's why you partner with Grainger. Grainger helps you find the high-quality and compliant products your business needs to inspect, detect, and help correct issues. And the sweetest part is, everyone gets a product that's as safe to eat as it is delicious. Call 1-800-GRAINGER, click Grainger.com, or just stop by. Grainger, for the ones who get it done.
Return our conversation with Lance LoRusso, attorney at law, Esquire, whatever terminology you want to use. His website's Blue Line Lawyer. He is a former police officer, still a sworn police officer or law enforcement officer in the Georgia area. And he's written multiple books. His website is bluelinelawyer.com. That's bluelinelawyer.com. And we'll talk about that in a few moments. Lance, part of the problem, and I've had you on the show a couple times before. I'd love to have you more often, but you're busy. And unfortunately, it seems like there is nonstop with these political-driven police chiefs having people arrested. And it's not just police chiefs, it's state's attorneys. And they go to court, and they spend millions of dollars going to court for someone doing their job. And guess who fuels that? In my opinion, it's the media. Oh, my goodness. It looks bad if we don't do something. So what we do is we go to the grand jury, and we put the blame on them, even though there's nothing wrong. They did nothing wrong.
Yeah, and we started, and because of this, about 4 years ago, we started the Blue Line Lawyer Institute, which is a think tank for law enforcement officers, trainers, and the lawyers who represent them. And if I can break this down, I mean, you're right. I'm involved in a murder case in Alabama right now where an officer did absolutely nothing wrong. Another case in Michigan where an officer was charged with murder, where, again, he did absolutely nothing wrong, followed his training. But this is kind of where we've gone, and it's taken me a little bit, but I've broken this down, and this is what's leading to all of these. So we have a situation where we're saying that officers need to use perfect tactics, and then they're using hindsight to evaluate the officer's tactics. But then they say, okay, well, if this officer did this wrong, that would have foreclosed the suspect from using force, unlawful force, against the officer, and therefore the officer's use of force is illegal, and then they charge them. Now, first of all, that is completely backwards. It has no bearing on the law. It is contrary to United States Supreme Court precedent, never mind the fact that it's just silly. I would say stupid, but I'm trying to be more appropriate. It's ridiculous. But that's what people are saying. Well, if the officer, they say they de-escalated the situation, and these are the people that want a 23-year-old to de-escalate somebody who's drunk and high when they can't de-escalate the keys out of their next-door neighbor on New Year's Eve to keep them from driving a car.
Right.
So it's amazing the level of scrutiny that is placed on officers with a retrospective analysis. The United States Supreme Court in 1989 said you cannot apply to officers' use of force.
And that doesn't stop them. And here I'm going to ask a couple pointed questions. One of the things I get, and we already know the answers, is there's a big distinction between killing and homicide, or killing and murder. And yet some people think they are interchangeable. Are they interchangeable, yes or no?
No, because the bottom line, a death resulting from an incident does not mean that anyone did anything wrong. you can justifiably cause a death. Now, any death is tragic. The loss of any life is tragic. But when you have a situation where an officer does everything they can according to their training, and, for instance, they're stopping somebody from committing an armed robbery, deadly force is not only authorized, and this is what's critical, it's consistent with the Fourth Amendment to the Constitution's reasonable force analysis. So to say that the officer's use of force comports with the Fourth Amendment to the United States Constitution, yet we're going to prosecute them under state law for murder, is just silly.
It is, and yet it seems to be a strategy that states attorneys, district attorneys, whatever terminology you want to use that are politically driven, do that repeatedly. They're doing it more often, and they ignore law, they ignore facts.
And you're absolutely right. They're ignoring both, because we've had situations where we've gotten involved and shown that the facts were not what was prepared and shown to the public, and then also that the actual charges, if you will, the prosecutor gets to pick the charges that are brought against every person that they charge. The charges that they selected are ridiculous. So, for example, we have people being charged with aggravated assault for shooting somebody with a taser. And in one of these states, the charge is you're using force that is likely to cause a serious bodily injury or death, where a taser is specifically designed not to cause serious bodily injury or death. So it's this hyperbole and this lack of knowledge surrounding these charges being made by individuals that just don't have a clue as to what they're doing.
No, and they don't seem to care. And here's the thing that really infuriates me, to be totally honest with you, Lance, is they don't even listen to facts, and they don't listen to anything other than they've made their mind up, they're going to proceed. They're going to go for it. And here's what people don't talk about. You have an officer that did nothing wrong, did everything right. They get suspended without pay, pending charges. And during that time, their spouses, their children lose all health insurance. They lose all income, and quite often they go broke. And they have to get attorneys to represent them on their dime.
Well, and I'm going to add something else on that, because, like I said, my firm has represented well over 350 people in shootings. I'm right at about 180. The devastation to the family goes beyond that. We've had officers that have had to move.
Yeah.
They've had to leave. Their kids have had to been pulled out of school, all in the name of tolerance, the people that are threatening to kill them because they were actually serving their community. And we've broken these down, and we've had some very good results just by showing. I mean, yes, I'd love to brag about the lawyering, but what we've done is just shown that what this officer did was reasonable under the circumstances. They were faced with an incredibly time-compressed decision-making opportunity, and they did what they were trained to do. So if the government is going to train you what to do, and you do exactly what they train you to do, where is the intent to commit a crime?
That's the thing. There's so much about this. And we can go into, and by the way, I got to say this. People say, well, police are stupid. They're dummies. They're idiots. These are the terminology. And Lance, and I'm saying this, he's not the only one that's become a lawyer. He's not the only police officer, and that includes sheriff's deputies, state troopers, constables, whatever terminology you want to use, federal agents that speak multiple languages, that have college degrees, that have choices. They could do different lines of work, make more money, and not have shift work to deal with, and not have this stress to deal with. But they still do it, and people have a calling. For me, it was very much a calling, a vocation. Was it for you?
It was, and it still is, and I'll go a step further. Right now, off the top of my head, and I'm picturing 5 law enforcement officers working every day, doing what you called shift work, who are members of the Bar Association. They are licensed attorneys. I know PhDs and master's degrees and master degree folks who are working in law enforcement. I taught in a master's program where just about everybody there was in public safety. But this is where it gets so dangerous. And I'm going to kind of poke a point here. When we have communities or we have politicians driving people out of law enforcement, the reason it's so easy for them to leave financially is they can always make more money.
That's right.
That's not hard. If you got a degree in finance, but you decided to serve your community, which I know a lot of folks have done, when your family says, hey, you're out, I'm done, we're not going to risk you going to jail for doing your job, it's not difficult for that officer to go find a place to work.
And they make that decision,
it's a double-edged sword.
And what happens, Lance,
Yeah.
we're going to a break. We got experienced officers that they're retiring the moment they're qualified. And we're losing the best of the best. This is the Law Enforcement Talk Radio Show. We'll return our conversation with Lance LoRusso, BlueLineLawyer.com in just a few moments. We'll be right back. I know we've all got lots of apps on our phone, but there's one you should check out, the Medium app, medium.com. And be sure to follow the Law Enforcement Talk Radio Show and podcast, where you find great articles, blog posts from me on Medium. That's the Law Enforcement Talk Radio Show and podcast on the Medium app, or you can go directly to medium.com.
If your job at a healthcare facility includes disinfecting against viruses, you know prevention is the best medicine. And maintaining healthy spaces starts with a healthy cleaning routine. Grainger's world-class supply chain helps ensure you have the quality products you need when you need them. From disinfectants and cleaning supplies to personal protective equipment, so you can help deliver a clean bill of health. Call 1-800-GRAINGER, click Grainger.com, or just stop by. Grainger, for the ones who get it done.
Return our conversation with Lance LoRusso, attorney at law. BlueLineLawyer.com is his website. It's the Blue Line Lawyer Institute. He's still an active law enforcement officer in Georgia. He was an active law enforcement officer, went to school, became an attorney, and he specializes in defending police across the United States. Licensed to do practice in Georgia, Tennessee, and Arkansas, and he consults with other law firms in other parts of the United States where he's not licensed to do defense work. That's BlueLineLawyer.com. We want to return to our conversation, Lance, about people with 20, 25 years on the bare minimum they need for retirement. They're pulling the plug. Or when cops get really good at their job, which is 10 plus years, they're like, this is not worth it. I've got drop. I'm eligible. We can't touch a pension for a while, but I'm leaving.
Yeah, and that's where the danger comes. So the hard part about this negative aspect of law enforcement, and really, I want to say up front, because I know you have a lot of law enforcement officers listed, don't listen to the noise. The public supports you. Yeah. Don't listen to the idiot that was able to grab a soundbite. The public supports you. But when people drive law enforcement officers away from the profession, they do it in two ways. We have troubles recruiting good people, and then the people that are the elders in the profession, like you said, the 10, 12, 20-year folks that have an incredible amount, millions of dollars worth of training. When they leave, we're losing the elders in the profession.
Right.
And hopefully this tide is starting to turn, but no profession can stand to move forward losing the elders and failing to attract the best and the brightest.
And this is something I'm sure you've seen, you probably don't want to comment on. And what happens is a lot of the law enforcement agencies across the United States, the ones who assume sergeant, lieutenant, command staff are usually the least experienced and the youngest, because there's a void of serious, experienced people. And what winds up happening, look, we all want the best of the best. When I have a medical emergency, it's usually the cops are going to show up first before the fire department. It's logistics-wise. I don't want the B team to show up. I want the A team. I want the best of the best to show up. And what's happening is a lot of these people are not the best. They're leaving, and they're being replaced by people that are, I want to say this, substandard. They just don't have the experience.
Well, and it's really funny that you say that, because you're trying to recruit folks, you're trying to keep your standards up, and it's the standard bearers in the agency that are fighting these outside forces. But it's even worse. The people that wanted to defund the police were actually causing more problems because they were reducing the amount of time and money available for training. And as those elders in the profession left, and I've told several of them, you're going to wind up in a situation where your shift commander, your precinct commander, and your chief have about 7 years of experience.
Right.
You did that. Not anybody else. You did that because you meddled in something that you don't understand.
And unfortunately, that's the reality. I want to go into something that, by the way, the defund the police movement, well, it seemed like it made sense. The result was less funding for training. And the one thing they're complaining about the most, the officers need more training, they're getting less of. And less people are showing up, less people are being hired, and now we have this snowball effect. The other one I hear all the time is end qualified immunity, as if somehow that's going to be the panacea that makes everything all right in the world. Qualified immunity, and I'm not a lawyer, you are, means basically if you're doing your job and you revert to your training, we're going to defend you. Ending qualified immunity means you're on your own. If a court issues an arrest warrant, let's just say in Atlanta, and a cop in Fulton County arrests someone on that warrant, when the qualified immunity is gone, they could be sued for that.
It's really interesting. First of all, I have found that a lot of people have no idea what qualified immunity is, but they want to wipe it out in our lifetime, which is awesome. You know, I'm glad your mom probably tells you you're bright every day, but nobody else thinks so. So when I have had conversations with people about qualified immunity, the examples that they give have nothing to do with qualified immunity. But let's look at that decision-making process that qualified immunity is intended to protect. It's a recognition that officers, as we talk about in Graham versus Connor, are often forced to make split-second decisions under circumstances that are tense, uncertain, and rapidly evolving about the amount of force that's necessary in a particular situation. Officers are not the only people who receive immunity as public officials. Prosecutors have prosecutorial immunity, which is almost absolute. Legislators and judges have absolute immunity. They make decisions with days, months, and years to contemplate their actions. The whole concept of qualified immunity is based on the fact that we want rapid response and decisive action. And we recognize the amount of time compression that takes place for officers to make decisions. And if you take that away and you make officers either take more time to think or expose them when they didn't have a chance to think more, expose them to personal liability for a mistake, then you're going to drive people out of the profession. Now, it may feel good and talk about it at a cocktail party, but the bottom line when you're dealing with those decisions, they have to be made. They have to be made quickly, and a reasonable officer, a reasonable belief means that you can have 100% reasonable belief and also be 100% wrong.
So here's a scenario, and I don't like hypotheticals, but I'm going to just say this as an example. When people preach ending qualified immunity, why, and let's just say it happens in your area, why would a police officer show up to what you call an emergency when they know they can get sued and they've got no protection whatsoever?
I'll give you a worse one. Why would they show up quickly when they can wait?
That's right.
You know, people talk about the difference between warriors and guardians, and I had to explain this to somebody. Warriors prevent homicides. Guardians draw chalk lines.
Yeah.
Which one do you want showing up to your kid's school when somebody's threatening their safety?
And this is preaching to the choir. You're still an active police officer. I'm retired. If someone was in a life and death situation, I would go to whatever lengths it took. And sometimes I paid physical prices. I have permanent, lifelong injuries as a result of that. I also have mental injuries, and I have relationship issues that I need to be aware of. And I was lucky. I was one of the lucky ones. I was in 4 shootings in 10 years, and not once did I kill anybody. The first 2, I never fired a shot back. The second 2 were different affairs altogether. Everybody lived. That's the good news. The bad news is it's so easy for people to judge based off what they read, they hear, they tell them me to tell them, and they don't bother to find a thing called facts, and facts matter.
Yeah, and the other thing they do is reconstruct the facts with what they know now, not with what the officer knew at the time.
Yeah.
And it's kind of an interesting issue, too, when you talk about qualified immunity. And Graham versus Connor, which is the critical case involving qualified immunity and kind of separating how we're going to analyze officers' use of force, it's all going to be according to the Fourth Amendment reasonableness standard. That case recognized, it's a brilliant opinion, and that case recognized that time compression and incomplete facts that officers will have. And there's a great quote in there. It says that you should judge the officers from a reasonable officer standard, not a reasonable person standard. Right. And you should not judge them as you would from the safety of the judge's courtroom, because that's not the world they live in. So getting back to what you were talking about, we have officers operating with incomplete information when they get to a call. Okay, I'm going to throw another hypothetical to you. Did you ever get dispatched to a call and it turned out to not be the way you thought it was?
Yeah.
That never happens, right?
No, all the
never
time.
happens. Yeah, and people maybe, I don't know, lie to the police. I know we'll have some counseling available for you later, but that happens. Well, the officer has to make a decision. They get to the scene, they have incomplete facts. So that's where the qualified immunity analysis just leaves the reality. And a lot of people who have put it in said officers, there's one person who heads up a law enforcement agency I'm not even going to talk about, but which one it is, but said that qualified immunity allows officers to get away with murder.
Right.
Well, that's just a special kind of ridiculous.
Well,
because
you're being nice,
if you commit a
Lance.
crime, you're not entitled to it.
Number one, you're being nice. That's called a special kind of stupid. We're talking with Lance LoRusso. He is an active police officer and a lawyer, and his website's bluelinelawyer.com, bluelinelawyer.com. And we return to the Law Enforcement Talk Radio Show. We're going to talk about a simple thing called being called to the scene and the implications. Don't go anywhere. We'll be right back. If you do any business on social media, creating content is one thing. The trick is, how do you turn those people that comment on your social media into consumers? There's a great tool, and you can get more information at letpops.com. That's letpops.com. Best of all, you can get started for free. letpops.com. Check it out today.
If your job at a healthcare facility includes disinfecting against viruses, you know prevention is the best medicine. And maintaining healthy spaces starts with a healthy cleaning routine. Grainger's world-class supply chain helps ensure you have the quality products you need when you need them. From disinfectants and cleaning supplies to personal protective equipment, so you can help deliver a clean bill of health. Call 1-800-GRAINGER, click Grainger.com, or just stop by. Grainger, for the ones who get it done.
Contact us from Georgia. We have Lance LoRusso on the Law Enforcement Talk Radio Show. Lance is a police officer, and he is also a lawyer. His website's bluelinelawyer.com. That's bluelinelawyer.com. The Blue Line Lawyer Institute. He's author of multiple books. He works across the United States, helping police officers, helping legal teams defend police officers, particularly when it comes to use of force. And he's licensed to practice, I believe it's in Georgia, Tennessee, and Arkansas. Be sure to get all the info at bluelinelawyer.com. One of the things, and there's so many things that I'll be honest with you, with what I do, especially Facebook, I realize I'm talking to idiots. I don't know what the quote is, and I'm going to probably butcher it, but any fool can criticize and complain, and most fools do. And that's from Dale Carnegie. And that's one of the things I try to keep in mind. The other one is never argue with an idiot, because they'll just drag you to their level and they'll beat you with years of experience. So, especially on social media, that's what I always say. So check out the Law Enforcement Talk Radio Show Facebook page. One of the big distinctions I want to tell people, Lance, is, number one, without going into cases that are specific, we put the actions of the officer last. Oh, this officer shot someone. They shot him because of this. Well, let's just say this. If that person hadn't gotten into a stolen car, they'd be alive. If that person learned you don't steal other people's property, they'll still be alive. If that person who's under the age of 21, or let's just say 17, is armed with a gun that they stole from someone else, they'd still be alive today. They made 150 decisions based off self that forced the officer to do something that they didn't want to do, and then people just blame the police. Well, guess what started the whole thing?
Yeah, I remember that analysis I talked about before, where the officer should have used better tactics to foreclose the criminal from using force against the officer or someone else, and then the officer shouldn't have had to use force. So that whole model, and you can see it if you look at these cases that are going forward, you can see it over and over again. And there's actually experts. I've done a lot of expert work, and it's actually very enjoyable and to be able to bring that to a jury and bring a reasonable perspective and inform them so they can make good decisions. But right now there's a case going on where somebody's saying, well, if the officer had used better tactics, they wouldn't have been in the confrontation they were in. You can't advance that without excusing abject criminality. And you termed it very well. You said there's 150 bad decisions you made before you got into this confrontation with law enforcement. But what happens, and this is one of the reasons I wrote Blue News, agencies were relying on, well, it's under investigation, we're not going to talk about it, and then 6 months later the officer's career and life has been ruined, and then they get cleared. You need to be able to articulate truly what happened, not, well, the officer shot them because they were in a stolen car. No, the officer shot them because they were in a stolen car. When they were stopped, they turned around with a gun, and that's why the officer stopped them. And unfortunately, we're letting people control the narrative. And as I say in the book, Blue News, like I said, all the profits go to law enforcement charities. If you don't tell your story, someone else will.
That's right.
And law enforcement has been terrible about telling their own story. And remember, if you're in uniform and you're acting as a public employee, you have no First Amendment rights. But you do have the right and the ability to tell your story and protect your people.
And this is where, there's no way to put it, this is where police chiefs, and I'm using the term because a lot of these different terms, commissioners, sheriffs, you name it, they need to grow a set. They need to grow a backbone and say simple things. Our officer did nothing wrong. And if you have a problem with that, that's on you. That's not on us.
And I'm going to go a step further. And this is the time when I'm going to go further than you did. I don't know, in the past 15 years, 20 years, I don't know where we got to a point where we have people heading up law enforcement agencies who are not law enforcement advocates. I don't know where this trend started. They're recruited, they move across the country, they get into positions, and they suddenly are going to revamp all of law enforcement that includes accepting abject criminality and not that law enforcement's job is to protect the public. I don't know how we got there. I don't know how these people got into position, but they need to go find something else to do because they're hurting the profession and they're keeping the public from being safe.
I would even go so far as to say this, that by distracting people's attention away from criminal behavior, they're encouraging it. And by everything you go after someone that did their job the way they were supposed to, and it didn't turn out well, and there's a tragedy at the end, you are purposely ignoring criminal behavior. And that's where we got to draw the line, in my opinion.
And it doesn't help anyone. And this is the thing, you know, we had people that wanted to break up gang databases because they said, well, you know, even though those gang officers were working hard to try to identify not only criminals, but people, especially young people at risk of being recruited in the gangs and spending the rest of their lives in them, well, we're going to break them up because of the racial makeup. Not recognizing that maybe the racial makeup is the way it is because people are preying in those gangs on young kids of that particular racial group.
Right.
Stop focusing on the soundbite and focus on fixing the problem.
One of the things that, and this is a sign up for going to Blue Line Lawyer. One of the things I had a conversation with my wife last night. And when someone says, oh, you're white, therefore you can understand and say, okay, let's just say this. I'm of Irish descent. You think we're the same as the British people? Do you think we're the same as French? Do you think we're the same as German? Do you think we're the same as Italian? That's ridiculous. When we turn around and say if people from Nigeria are exactly the same as people from Somalia, that's equally ridiculous. And it should be clearly evident on your face, but people don't recognize that. And a lot of these decisions are based solely off of race, not behavior, not training, not legal issues. I want to go into what you're doing today, Lance. You're very busy. You got BlueLineLawyer.com. What is that all about?
So bluelawnlawyer.com is a repository for our books, also our training. We just finished a webinar on use of force and canines, which is an area that we've been exploring, trying to protect our canine officers. It was called Force and the Fur Missile, which somebody came up with, which was just hilarious. But, you know, the unique issues that you have with law enforcement and canines, because obviously the officer doesn't use force. The canine does, and the canine has to make those decisions. We also get into, and we've worked a lot with force science to talk about the reality of these situations. When you have a use of force analysis, it's not enough just to look at the video, because the video is not going to tell you what the officer saw. The body camera sees differently than the officer's eyes in low light and no light. It has no peripheral vision. It doesn't focus on a weapon to the exclusion of everything else. And to look at human performance without recognizing the limitations of it is just unrealistic. So I used an example one time with somebody who's a big football fan. I said, did you ever see a professional receiver miss a ball at 10 yards? So yeah, it happens all the time. It's like, he's a professional. Nobody's threatening to shoot him, and there's no time compression other than he might get hit. So how do you expect an officer whose life is in jeopardy to make a perfect decision every time?
And by the way, that we demand the best of the best. And I had really good, just like you, I had really good experienced officers training me. And most of my officers that trained me were Vietnam combat veterans. And we had a few Korean War veterans that were command staff. And they did not play. If you did not do your job and you didn't do it the right way, you were gone. Very quickly, bluelinelawyer.com. That's the website, bluelinelawyer.com. Can people get all the information they want there? Can they get a hold of you and contact your team?
They can, and one of the things that we've been doing is helping law enforcement officers by helping their attorneys. The Blue Line Lawyer Institute was created. It's by invitation. They can apply if law enforcement officers and trainers are always welcome to come, but the lawyers have to be screened and be appropriate to come to our training. We have our 4th annual Force Forum, where we cover not only use of force, we cover the dynamics and realities of use of force, but we also cover officer resilience, which is something I praise you for always focusing on. But, you know, the amount of things that officers see that they will never unsee, that burden of service, if you will, goes well beyond that retirement date. And we're committed to making sure that we're taking care of the people who serve us and take care of us.
Lance, number one, thanks for your service. Thanks for all you do for our law enforcement officers. And thank you for being guests on the show. All very much appreciated.
That's my honor.
I'd like to thank our guests for coming on the Law Enforcement Talk Radio Show. The Law Enforcement Talk Radio Show is a nationally syndicated weekly radio show broadcast on numerous AM and FM radio stations across the country. We're always adding more affiliate stations. If you enjoyed the podcast version of the show, which is always free, please do me a favor and tell a friend or 2 or 3. I'll be back in just a few days with another episode of the Law Enforcement Talk Radio Show and Podcast. Until then, this is John J. Wiley. See ya.
If your job at a healthcare facility includes disinfecting against viruses, you know prevention is the best medicine. And maintaining healthy spaces starts with a healthy cleaning routine. Grainger's world-class supply chain helps ensure you have the quality products you need when you need them. From disinfectants and cleaning supplies to personal protective equipment, so you can help deliver a clean bill of health. Call 1-800-GRAINGER, click Grainger.com, or just stop by. Grainger, for the ones who get it done.